Editing a landscape. This short video will provide information about editing a landscape, including basic information about editing rules, editing rule order, and how to create editing rules. Other videos within this general topic include landscape overview, landscape critique, and creating and utilizing barriers and masks. Landscape edits are often needed to improve the landscape, or LCP, to better reflect areas of changed vegetation, or canopy, since the last release of data, and to aid in calibration and ultimately improve fire behavior projections. First, to access the Landscape Editor screen from an analysis, select Landscape Editor from the left-hand menu. I am currently viewing a near-term analysis, but the process for creating landscape edits is the same for Basic, Short-Term, and FS Pro. To add a landscape edit, select the Add button. Creating landscape edits in WFDS can be tricky, and there are some important basic concepts to understand. First, an attribute, fuel model or canopy characteristic, for a cell in the landscape can only be changed one time. What this means is that if you create a rule to change an attribute for a specific area, and then later on you create another rule that would change the same attribute for the same area, the later rule will not take effect, as each cell's attributes can only be changed one time. You won't receive an error message or anything if you have more than one rule to change the same attribute for the same location. The second rule just won't take effect on the landscape. The next thing to remember is that when you have more than one rule, the rule on the top of the list is applied first, and then the rule on the bottom of the list is applied last. This can be important to remember, particularly when creating global rules, those that affect the entire landscape, and masked rules, those that apply to a specific area designated by a mask. In this example, the top rule is applied first, then the next, and the third rule is applied last. The next point to remember is that the landscape edits that are created as rules always query the original landscape data source selected to implement the change. For example, if you created a rule to change 141 to 142, and then had a later rule to change 142 to 145, the second rule does not change the original 141 to 145, simply because it was changed to 142. The second rule will query the original 142 to change to 145, not any 142 that resulted from the previous landscape edit. The final point to note about landscape edits is that they can be bounded by numerous conditions, known as rule conditions. Rule conditions can limit the application of a rule based on elevation, aspect, slope, stand height, canopy base height, canopy bulk density, canopy cover, fuel model, and mask. For example, if you have a rule that you wanted to apply to an area above 6,000 feet, you can add a minimum value of 2,000 meters to the elevation box. It is important to note the units that the rule conditions are bounded by, as entering feet instead of meters is a common mistake when creating rule conditions. If you wanted to limit a rule to a specific fuel model or models, then you simply select the fuel model and then move it over to the right-hand box. And finally, if you want to limit edits to a specific area, you can limit them by shape mask, by selecting an existing mask from the box on the left and moving it over to the box on the right. To learn more about creating a mask, watch the video Creating and Utilizing Barriers and Masks. Let's now create a rule to change fuel model 141 to 142. To do this, we select fuel model as the attribute to change, and select the new fuel model to be 142. Now from the fuel model selection box, select 141 and move it over to the right-hand box. This indicates that the fuel model change will only occur in fuel model 141, the model indicated on the right. Now select Save. It is always a good idea to read the rule you wrote to make sure it says what you meant it to say. This rule says that if fuel model is 141, we will set the fuel model to 142. The rule can also be verified on the landscape by creating a landscape and then viewing the view landscape map to ensure the change was made. For more information on creating a landscape, see the video Landscape Overview. Let's make another rule to adjust one of the canopy characteristics. Select Add. I'll make a rule to lower the canopy base height for the fuels in very high load dry climate timber shrub 165 down to 1 meter. To do this, select canopy base height from the attribute to change. I will then type 1 into the new attribute value for 1 meter. We could also change the value by a factor using the conversion factor box. For example, if we wanted to double CBH, we could enter 2 here. But if we wanted to reduce the CBH by half, we could enter 0.5. You can now see why it is important to know the values of your landscape before making changes, as you might inadvertently lower or raise them too much or too little if you don't know what the starting values are. For more information on reviewing and critiquing a landscape, watch the video Landscape Critique. Remember that the 1 value here is measured in meters. If, for example, we wanted to drop it to 1 foot, we would enter 0.3 meters. I will next move over the 165 to the selection box on the right. As we wanted to limit the change to just the fuels that are 165 and not make the change to all the other fuels on the landscape. Next, select Save. By reading the rule, we can verify the change that we wanted was made. This rule says that if the fuel model is 165, then we will set the canopy base height to 1. And finally, let's make a rule utilizing a mask. Let's change the fuel model within the area of the previous year's fire scar to 181 to represent an area of very slow fire growth. A fire scar from 2011 is already loaded as a mask, labeled Fire Scar 2011. For more information about creating and utilizing masks, watch the video on creating and utilizing barriers and masks. First, select the fuel model as the attribute to change. Next, type in 181 into the new attribute value. Now, move over the mask for the Fire Scar 2011 to the selection box on the right, and select Save. Again, reading the rule can help make sure that it was applied correctly. The rule reads, if the LCP intersects Fire Scar 2011, we will set the fuel model to 181. There is one more adjustment we will need to make to this rule. Remember, at the beginning of the video, we discussed how rule order matters. If we leave the rules in the order they are here, 141 will be changed to 142 across the entire landscape first. And then our masked rule will take effect only in the areas not already changed by the first rule. Basically, if we leave the rule order as is, for areas in the fire scar that were 141 previously, the fuel model will change to 142. And all the other areas in the fire scar will then be changed to 181 in the next rule. This could leave patches of 142 in the old burn, which is not what we had desired when we made the rule to change the masked area to 181. To fix this, simply select the radio button next to the rule you want to move, and then select Move Up. In this case, we'll move the Fire Scar rule to the top of the list. Now, the masked rule is on the top and will take effect first and change all areas within the fire scar to 181. And the subsequent rule will change the fuel models 141 to 142 and will take effect only outside the masked area, since an attribute can only be changed one time for a given cell. To review, in this video, we covered basic information about editing rules, editing rule order, and how to create editing rules.